Hello and welcome to Mekelle Foresight. And this is Mekelle, producer and host of the show. Martin Plaut, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, former journalist at the BBC. He is a celebrated writer and analyst on African issues, and particularly on the Horn of Africa and Southern Africa. He is with us today, and I'm honored to have him on Mekelle Foresight. Martin Plaut, welcome to the show.
It's very great pleasure to be with you and with your viewers.
Thank you. In your recent post, you tried to infer the strategy of Tigray Defense Forces, TDF's southward push, which is going on as we speak, by quoting one of its commanders. Part of the quote reads, and I quote, "We are continuing towards Gondar. Gaind is next. Then we will take control of Debre Tabor and are going to block the Humera route. We are prepared to block the route between Gondar and Bahar Dar. This is the mission we have been given." Off quote. It now looks that this mission is progressing as planned. What, in your opinion, will TDF stand to gain with this strategy?
Well, let me say, I mean, I'm not on the ground, which is what, of course, I would wish to be as a journalist. That is always the best way to report anything, is to actually be somewhere and see it yourself and to be able to report with authenticity. I was quoting an army commander. It is his assessment of what is happening. As far as I can tell, it is an accurate translation of what he said. And I've also been following the other source, which is incredibly useful, which is Ethiopia Map. Frustratingly, one doesn't know who actually produces Ethiopia Map, which is a strange situation to be in when it is one of the few really documented sources of information. Having said that, it now looks as if the progress westwards is pretty close to actually reaching the shores of Lake Tana. It seems to be, if the information is accurate, something like 25 kilometers from succeeding in doing that. Now, if that happens, of course, the main road north-south along the eastern shore of Lake Tana is blocked. And you then have a huge, shall we say, problem for the Amhara people, because the north and the south are then divided. And this is clearly one of the strategies that the Tigrayan Defense Forces are employing. And we'll have to see in the next couple of days if they achieve this or if they don't achieve it. But clearly it is, having retaken Mekelle and pushed everybody out of most of the territory, both the Eritreans and the Ethiopian forces, pushing them southwards, and the Amhara forces, who were also in occupation of some areas. It seems as if the Tigrayans have now achieved a lot of what they set out to do. Where they're going, of course, that I can't comment on. I'm not a member of the Tigrayan command.
Yeah, thank you. Amnesty International has recently released a report on sexual violence in Tigray. The report says the pattern of sexual violence emerging from the survivors' accounts indicates that the violations have been part of a strategy to terrorize, degrade, and humiliate both the victims and their ethnic group. Now, this report also referred to the rampancy and continuous nature of the strategy and points to the fact that it's been tolerated at the highest level of government in both Ethiopia and Eritrea. Apart from the use of sexual violence and famine as a weapon of war, widespread massacres, ethnic cleansing, forced displacement, mass abduction and arrest, blanket denial of services targeting whole populations are reported to have happened in Tigray, and most of these were corroborated at different times by the UN, third parties like the UN, international aid agencies, and the international media. What, in your opinion, needs to happen for the international community to call a spade, to recognize what's happening in Tigray for what it is, a genocide and not just a war?
I mean, it's a very good question that you ask, and it's a difficult one to answer with absolute certainty. I mean, let's go through it in detail. I mean, I agree with you. The most important part of the report that came out from Amnesty was that allegation that this was sanctioned at the highest level. That means that effectively the president of Eritrea and the prime minister of Ethiopia and those surrounding them have actually launched a strategy of mass rape and sexual violence against the women of Tigray. And I mean, this is, when the first allegations of genocide came out, I was very dubious about it. I never used the word genocide because it is such an explosive term, and you should be used very sparingly. But when you actually see that there is apparently an attempt to eradicate people through rape, I mean, actually by impregnating women and forcing them to have children who are not of their, do not have fathers of their ethnic group, that comes very close to that kind of allegation. What it will take to get the international community to take this seriously is hard to say. And what do you mean by the international community? I mean, do you mean the Chinese? Do you mean the Russians? Do you mean the Europeans, or do you mean the United States? Now, in the United States and the European Union, I'm sure it is taken extremely seriously because there is such pressure on the politicians, particularly from the growing number of women politicians who feel this very, very personally. They can imagine what this is like. I mean, the ex-Prime Minister of New Zealand has been extremely outspoken about this. I've heard nothing from the Russians. I've heard nothing from the Chinese, which you wouldn't expect because, human rights is not an issue in countries which are, frankly, ruled by Marxist-Leninist organizations. So it depends on who you're asking that question of. And even then, they are constrained by what they can do. I mean, in theory, both President Isaias and Prime Minister Abiy could be brought before the International Criminal Court, because it is possible for the Security Council to make that ruling. But how would you get it through the Security Council? It will be vetoed by the Chinese or the Russians. So the room for maneuver is actually quite limited in reality. Yes, if this report is borne out by proof, and of course it will all have to be proved, if it is borne out, then these are crimes that could be taken at an international level. But how do you force that to happen? Very difficult indeed.
But is it a matter of ideology? Because you mentioned the communism. What is at the core of this, discrepancy and what is driving them to have this kind of stand?
Well, you only have to look at the history of the Soviet Union, now Russia, or the history of China, and let us not forget that in the history of the great murderers of the human race, there are three who stand out. They are Hitler, Mao, and Stalin. And of those, Hitler actually killed the smallest number of people. I mean, he is the most reprehensible person. I have no. I'm not standing here to defend him in any shape, way, or form. But actually, he is, in terms of pure numbers, he murdered fewer people than Stalin or Mao. Mao actually killed the largest number of people. And one has to remember that. That is what these people are capable of, and have never owned up to it and never really faced a judgment about it. The German people have completely accepted their responsibility for the murder of the Jewish population, of the gay people, and of the gypsies in the Second World War. They do not deny it in any shape, way, or form. Can you see any similar action by the rulers of what was the Soviet Union and what is now the Chinese? I do not.
Okay, moving on. The Tigray Defense Forces, TDF, and the Oromo Liberation Front, OLF, have recently announced that they have reached to an agreement to work together to do away with their common enemy. What significance do you attach to this agreement, or what implication will the agreement have, in your opinion, on Ethiopia's new political dispensation and also the ongoing war?
Well, I think this is the most important development, really, since the fall of Mekelle, because, you know, until now, the people of Tigray were standing more or less alone against the Eritrean army, the Ethiopian army, Somali forces, the Amhara. An extraordinary achievement to actually even manage to make a stand, but they did it, and they then went on the offensive, as we can see, very successfully. There have, of course, and it's been something that's been very much forgotten by the outside world, is that this is not the only conflict that is underway at the moment. And the Oromo have been fighting for many, many years. And let's not forget that they fought against the Tigrayans as well, because, and this is why what we're seeing is so important. I mean, in a sense, you can see it in two phases. Prime Minister Abiy, his military appears to have been very severely mauled by the Tigrayan forces. I'm not saying they were defeated, but they were certainly severely damaged by the attacks that the Tigrayans carried out. As a result, he then did a huge mobilization, called on all the special forces and all volunteers, and got everybody from, you know, whether they were Somali or Oromo or Amhara, anyone he could, to join in a huge peasant army, which was, in a sense, replicated the 1984 Derg attack on the on Eritrea. You may have remembered it, which ended up in an appalling mauling by the Eritreans of the Ethiopian army. So it didn't work, but I mean that was what Prime Minister Abiy was trying to do. And in a sense, in a response to that, the Tigrayans, who've obviously been working on the strategy for some time, have reached an agreement with the Oromo. And the Oromo, as I said, have been fighting for a long time, but this has obviously given the Oromo a great deal of encouragement. And it's not just the Oromo; there are other ethnic groups who have also joined in what is now looks like as if it's the replication of. So you, in a sense, have two alliances now against each other. It's not just a Tigrayan Ethiopia fight; it is an alliance. Two alliances, one based in Mekelle, so to speak, and the other based in Addis, who are now fighting each other. They're not exactly identical, they're not equal in any shape, way, or form, but these two groups are fighting. And in a sense, what we're seeing is the reproduction of the alliance that swept the Derg from power in 1991. Let's not forget that the Oromo were part of that alliance, and that they then left the alliance. It crumbled. It was a great pity that it did. And the Tigrayans ended up with the EPRDF, which, you know, there's been a lot of criticism of the way that they behaved, both against the Oromo and against the other members of the EPRDF, where they were frankly, I mean, let's not beat about the bush. They used some pretty tough tactics and also put in puppet organizations, which ruled. Even though they looked as if they were, shall we say, Somali or whoever, were really run by the Tigrayans. So, in a sense, what is important in the current situation, and if you look at the statements from the Oromo Liberation Army, they say, yes, we will go into this alliance, but let's not make the mistakes of the past. And I think they are looking back to what happened in 1991 and after that, in the way in which the Tigrayans related to these groups. So it is a huge boost to the Tigrayan cause, but it also should leave the Tigrayans thinking seriously about how they will work with other groups in the future, both in the war and potentially in a new government of Ethiopia, if that comes about.
Good. In an article you wrote on 15 August 2021 under the title Preliminary Thoughts on Reconfiguring the Horn of Africa, you pointed to the possibility of fragmentation of Ethiopia, which, according to the US Institute for Peace, would be, quote, the largest state collapse in modern history. You also added that if such a scenario is avoided, it is clear that a new dispensation for Ethiopia is required, which could involve a new relationship with neighboring states and Eritrea in particular. These last words are your own words. Would you, for the sake of our viewers, please explain, based on the two perspectives you mentioned in the article, what kind of reconfiguration are you referring to?
Well, the first thing I have to say in this is that this is, I'm merely saying that this is a possibility. And I would really underline what I'm about to say now. This is something that must be decided by the people of the Horn of Africa and not by anybody outside. And it should be decided upon negotiations and consultations and careful thought. Other people can advise, they're not important. What is important is that people themselves should make these decisions, and they will be extremely hard and difficult to produce. I mean, we can't go on with a situation in which the instability that has taken, has been around in the Horn since the beginning of time, and I mean, it goes back hundreds, if not thousands, of years. We can't go on playing this game. It's got some kind of proper relationship needs to be established between the peoples. And the one other thing I said in that article was, this is not special about the Horn of Africa. Europe was destroyed by wars. From the 1870 Franco-Prussian War, the First World War, the Second World War. It didn't just affect Europe; it affected the whole of the world. And these, so I mean, I'm not saying that there's something special about the Horn of Africa. What I'm saying is the Horn of Africa needs to get sort of towards the position which Europe has, where they now have the European Union, where they've stopped having these stupid wars, which do nothing to help anybody. And although there was the war in Yugoslavia, which was tragic, that's behind us. And I hope that we now have some kind of stability. That's what the Horn of Africa needs to find, is a new dispensation in which the borders, instead of being fought over, become irrelevant. Now, how you get to that position is up to the people of the Horn and nobody else. But I mean, everybody knows that Ethiopia, for example, would like to have a navy. Well, why shouldn't it be based in Massawa or Assab? I mean, they were based there in the past. There are huge interconnections, traditional, religious, between the peoples of the region. I mean, look at the Afars and the Somalis, great trading peoples, who've always moved backwards and forwards across borders as if they really didn't exist. And, this should be encouraged. We shouldn't be, clamping down on these things. We should find a way of making this possible. When I say we, I mean the people of the Horn. That is what is required. And everybody knows this to be the case, but everybody then hangs on to their tiny bit of power and says, oh, this was my grandfather's or great-grandfather's hillside. I must control it. That way lies nothing but death and destruction, because, you can never unravel the complexities of these things. And, these problems are not just being faced by the people of the Horn of Africa. In Britain, where I live now, although I'm an African originally, the relationship between the Irish, the Northern Irish, is still being debated, may change. Scotland may break away from Britain and become independent. I don't know where it's going. The only thing is, it should be done peacefully through a referendum, through a discussion, through debate. Let us not go back to more fighting.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, that is very comforting. The first criterion you recommended for regional transformation in the high likelihood of redrawing of the map of the Horn of Africa is that the issue, as you said earlier, must not be decided by anyone, by Western, Chinese, or Russian influence, or Arab cash. But given the positions these actors have been taking and the roles they have assumed for themselves in this conflict, is this hands-off approach you are proposing a possibility?
It's a hope. Of course, you're absolutely right. These countries don't intervene in their neighbors or in I mean, the Chinese or the Americans are not even neighbors, but I mean, you know, in the region for fun, they do it because they feel that they have their vital interests are at stake, and you know, they want to control the Red Sea, and this is one way of doing it, or they want to fight Al-Shabaab or whatever. You know, they all have their own interests. All I'm saying is that, you know, this needs to be resisted by the people of the Horn, and they need to find a way of saying we will put our collective interests first and not be you know, allow money to, for example, decide what is going on. I mean, it's really interesting. I don't know. Yesterday we had President Erdogan and Prime Minister Abiy were meeting in Turkey, and just before that, the UAE met with President Erdogan. Now we know that the UAE put huge sums of money into Ethiopia and into Eritrea just before the 2018 peace agreement came about. They frankly bought the peace. I mean, that was, you know, I may be wrong, but that seems to me highly likely that what happened. So what are they involved in now?
And there are those who say that it was not a peace agreement; it was a war agreement that led to what is happening now.
That's certainly possible. And you know, have they given the money now for Prime Minister Abiy to buy President Erdogan's drones? Is that what they did? I don't know. I wasn't there, and of course they're not going to tell me. But I mean, we know that drones are now being seen. One was shot down in Sudan. It was a Turkish drone, it seems. Well, where did it come from? Who paid for it? You can put two and two together. Now, of course, one can put two and two together and get the wrong sum and be completely incorrect. So these things need to be verified. All I'm saying is that these are to be watched. The one other thing, if I may just say so, is there's a very interesting story being put out by the BBC overnight, which looks at the propaganda as a major weapon. And they look at interviews that they were given by some Amhara contacts they had, which we were told that these were Tigrayan children who had been conscripted into the Tigray army. And when they then listened to it carefully, it was clear that these were not. These were it was done in Amharic and Amharinga, and the children were being coached. I mean, it's this kind of, so there is so much false information out there, and one has to be so careful about what one assumes. But it's worth looking at that BBC piece. It's well done.
Yeah, just to remind everyone that the UAE gave not only money, huge amounts of money, but also drones.
Yeah, certainly possible. Where they got them from, I don't know. Apparently, some might have been Chinese. And after all, we know that the UAE was operating out of bases in Eritrea for their own purposes, and were torturing people, according to I think it was Amnesty International brought out a report which reported on exactly that.
Okay. But if this talk of drones now coming to the picture again, if that is true, what do you think? Will they have an effect on the course of the war? What effect will they have this time?
Well, listen, I'm not a military person. You've asked the wrong person. But I mean, you know, I don't think that the Ethiopians would be moving heaven and earth to get these things if they were useless.
Okay. Do you see peace, I mean, a negotiated peace as a possibility? What needs to happen for this ongoing war to eventually have a peaceful resolution?
Well, all wars in the end. there has to be some kind of talks, even if they are only a surrender. There's always negotiations. So negotiations must be there. I would just hope that there are some kind of backdoor channels which are being used now to already begin to shape out what this might be. And if there's one way in which outside powers can be helpful, and I don't care whether they are, the Italians, the Norwegians, or the Americans who are doing it, and they've all done this in the past, that are bringing people together and saying, let's have some discussions off the record and, quietly between the different sides. That's a very useful thing that people can do to try and achieve the basis from which a peace might be created. But, at the moment, the problem is that, let's be honest, the Tigrayans are fighting with their backs against the wall. I mean, if they lose, it could be the end of the Tigrayan nation. So they have nothing to lose. They have to fight. Prime Minister Abiy knows that if he loses, what chance that he survives? And President Isaias in Asmara has exactly the same thought. If he loses, he has staked everything on this war. So the problem is there's too much at stake at the moment. Neither side has delivered a decisive blow. They've had strong blows. I mean, when the fall of Mekelle was a huge success for Prime Minister Abiy, the recapture of Mekelle was a huge success for the Tigrayans. So, but these haven't been the final knockout blow. So, is the attack down into the Amhara region decisive? We will only know after it's finished.
And finally, I take you back to the article, your article I mentioned earlier. You end that article on a positive note, saying nation states and forms of government are important, but not invariably critical. What do you say to those who depict a less positive picture due to the ongoing war, which is also, as you wrote, tearing at the seams that used to bind the people together, the social fabric, the traditions, religions, social and community links you mentioned?
Well, in the end, I believe that those are much more powerful, even though they are damaged, than any other relationship. It is the people gathering in Aksum, for hundreds of years. Nobody forgets that. Those kind of links, the sacred sites that Muslims travel to, the way that people have traveled along the Hajj route. People don't forget that, and they don't. Those are burnt into people's souls, and that is why I think those kind of links, plus the ones I mentioned earlier about the trading, which goes backwards and forwards. I mean, for example, the trade in cut, which everybody knows about, is never on anybody's books, but everybody knows it's happening. These are deeply ingrained in societies. And that is why I think that they are much more powerful than any transitory bits of paper, which designate where borders are. So I'm hopeful in the end that these things will overcome the differences. And if I may end on one anecdote, many years ago, when I was at the BBC, I had a very good friend who was a Palestinian, and there'd been some terrible attack by the Israelis on, I think it was a Palestinian camp. I can't remember why it had happened or what the circumstances were. And I went in and I said, listen, I'm so sorry. This is just terrible. It's really, it's such a tragedy. And he said, look, in the end, we are doomed to live with each other. This will pass. And, perhaps that gives one a sense of optimism about the future. Peoples do live together. They do, in the end, find ways of reconciling with each other. And, these issues, hard as they are to overcome and forgive, can be done. And as I said, the German children and French children whose parents, grandparents, and grandparents had killed each other in hundreds of thousands, if not millions, now walk into each other's cities, classrooms, discotheques, as if there's never been a problem. Let's hope that we can do the same in the Horn of Africa.
I think let's end on that positive note. And well, we have come to the end of the interview. Thank you very much, Martin Plaut, for these analytical reflections.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.